The suitcase sat on Clara's lap, handles worn smooth from years of gripping. Through the dusty window, a wooden sign read, "Copper Springs," in faded letter. She stepped onto the platform, clutching the letter in her pocket. A teaching position. Room and board included. Her last chance. The station master looked up from his ledger. Gray mustache. Spectacles low on his nose. "Mrs. Whitfield." "Yes." He shook his head. "The Hartleys filled that position 3 days ago. Their daughter's friend needed work." Clara's fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. "But I have the letter. They wrote to me." "I'm sorry, ma'am." She sat on the long oak bench. The train pulled away behind her, wheels grinding against iron. In her pocket, $3 silver. Not enough for a room. Not enough for a ticket out. The station doors creaked open. "We'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment and say hello. And if you've been enjoying these stories without subscribing, we'd be grateful if you joined our little community. It helps us keep bringing you more tales like this one." 2 small faces peered around a man's legs. Identical dresses. Identical braids. Blue eyes fixed on Clara like she was something strange and new. The man walked to the freight window. Mud caked on his boots. Hat pushed back on his forehead. He signed for a wooden crate while the girls drifted toward the bench. Clara looked away. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes suspended in the air. "You sad?" The voice came from knee height. Clara turned. One of the twins stood an arm's length away, head tilted to the side. "Lily." The man's voice carried across the station. "Don't bother the lady." "I'm not bothering. I'm asking." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm fine." The girl didn't move. "Your eyes are red." The other twin approached slowly, quieter. She stopped beside her sister but said nothing. Just watched. Lily pulled a corn-husk doll from her pocket. Yellow yarn for hair. Calico scraps for a dress. "We got 2 of these. You want one?" Clara shook her head. "That's kind. But Mama made them. Before she went to heaven?" Lily said it the way children speak of things too large to understand. Matter of fact. Simple. The quiet twin tugged her sister's sleeve. But Lily held the doll out anyway, arm extended, waiting. Clara's hands wouldn't move. She stared at the small offering, at the careful stitches some other woman's fingers had made, at this child giving away a piece of her dead mother to a stranger. The man's boots sounded on the wooden floor. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes moved from Clara's face to the suitcase at her feet to the empty platform behind her. "You waiting for someone?" "No." He nodded slowly. Didn't press. Just stood there, taking in what the scene told him without asking for more. "Thomas Reed." He touched the brim of his hat. "These are my daughters." Clara managed her name. Managed to keep her voice from breaking. Rose stepped closer to her father, but kept watching Clara. Then she spoke for the first time, voice barely above a whisper. "You got a home." The question hung in the dusty air between them. Lily looked up at her father. Thomas Reed's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Clara's fingers curled around the suitcase handle. She had no answer that wouldn't sound like begging. Thomas Reed looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved to the station master's window, then back to her face. "You came for work." Clara nodded. The words stuck somewhere below her collarbone. "The Hartley position?" It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns. Lily tugged at her father's hand. "Papa." "She's sad." "Hush now." But his voice carried no edge. Clara forced herself to speak. "I'll find something. There must be other families needing help. Thomas shook his head slowly. Not many. Copper Springs isn't a big place. He shifted the crate under his arm. You got money for the hotel? The question landed hard. Clara's silence answered for her. Rose pressed closer to her father's leg, but her eyes never left Clara's face. I need someone, Thomas said. The words came out rough, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep. The girls, my grandmother, she's 73, can't do what she used to. He paused. There's a room, food. It's work, not charity. Clara's spine stiffened. I don't take handouts. I'm not offering one. His jaw set. I'm offering a job. Cooking, cleaning, watching these two when I'm in the fields. He looked down at his daughters. Their mother passed 2 years back. We manage. But managing isn't the same as living. Lily held up the corn husk doll again. Please. Clara stared at the small face, the hopeful eyes. Something cracked inside her chest, a fissure she couldn't afford. No. The word came out harder than she intended. Thank you, Mr. Reed, but no. Thomas didn't argue, didn't push. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, set it on the bench beside her. North Road out of town, past the oak ridge, left at the stone fence. He touched his hat brim. If you change your mind. He took Lily's hand. Rose followed, glancing back once before they disappeared through the station door. Clara sat motionless. The paper lay on the wood beside her, edges curling in the evening chill. Outside, the light faded. Orange to amber to gray. The station master lit the oil lamp above his window, then locked the door without looking at her. She counted her coins again. $3. Not enough for a room. Not enough for a ticket anywhere. The lamp flickered. Shadows stretched across the empty platform. Clara picked up the paper, unfolded it. Simple directions in a rough hand. She stood, lifted her suitcase. The cold bit through her thin dress as she stepped outside. The road north was barely visible in the dusk. The farmhouse appeared as a dark shape against the purple sky. 3 miles of walking had worn blisters into Clara's heels, and her arm ached from the weight of the suitcase. A dog barked once from somewhere behind the house. Then silent. Clara stopped at the gate. A wooden fence, whitewashed but peeling. A porch with 2 rocking chairs. Light glowing warm through curtained windows. The door opened before she could knock. An old woman stood in the frame, lamp in hand. White hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp as broken glass. You're the one. Station. Clara's throat closed. I know what he said. He sent one of the girls running ahead. The woman stepped back. Well, come in. No use standing in the dark. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and bean soup. A cast iron stove radiated heat in the corner. The table was set for 4, but only 3 chairs were filled. Thomas at the head, the twins on either side. Spoons frozen halfway to their mouths. Sit. The old woman pointed to the empty chair. I'm Martha. You'll call me that. Not ma'am, not Mrs. Reed. Martha. Clara lowered herself into the seat. The wood creaked beneath her. Lily grinned across the table. Rose watched, spoon still suspended. Thomas ladled soup into a bowl and slid it across the table. Steam rose from the surface. Clara's stomach clenched. She hadn't eaten since the morning before. Thank you. Her voice came out thin. Martha sat down beside her. We eat at 6, breakfast at 5:30. The girls wake at dawn, whether you want them to or not. Clara picked up the spoon. The soup was thick, rich with salt pork and white beans. She forced herself to eat slowly, though her hands wanted to shake. Your room's at the end of the hall, Martha continued. Small, but it's got a window and a lock. You'll want the lock. Clara looked up. Not because of anyone here, Martha added, her eyes flicking briefly to Thomas. Because a woman should always have a door she can close. The twins finished eating and scrambled down from their chairs. Lily ran to Clara's side immediately. You came, I told Rose you would. Rose hung back by the doorway. Watching from the shadow, Thomas stood. But Papa? Now? He led them down the hall, their whispered protests fading with each step. A door closed. Footsteps creaked on old boards. Martha rose and began clearing bowls. Clara moved to help, but the old woman waved her off. Not tonight. You look like you'd fall over if the wind blew wrong. Clara's hands rested on the table. She stared at the grain of the wood, the scratches from years of use, the small burns where hot pans had been set down carelessly. Why did he offer this? The question escaped before she could stop it. He doesn't know me. Martha paused at the sink, her back to Clara. He knows enough. She set down a bowl, turned slowly. He knows what it looks like when someone's got nowhere else to go. The lamp on the table flickered. Outside, the dog barked again, then fell quiet. Martha dried her hands on her apron. Your room's the last door on the left. There's a quilt on the bed. Might need another blanket when the nights turn cold. Clara nodded. She pushed herself up, walked down the narrow hallway, found the door, pushed it open. A small room. Single bed, iron frame, wooden dresser with a clouded mirror, window facing the fields. Nothing but darkness beyond the glass. She set her suitcase in the corner, sat on the edge of the mattress. The springs groaned beneath her weight. On the nightstand, someone had placed a folded blanket, brown and red wool, hand-woven. Clara touched the fabric, rough under her fingers, made by hands she would never know. She didn't undress, didn't pull back the covers, just sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of a strange house settling around her. Somewhere down the hall, a child's voice murmured, then silence. Clara looked at her shoes, still on her feet. Ready to run if she needed to, she left them on. Beat for part 4. Clara woke before dawn. Gray light seeped through the window, and somewhere outside a rooster crowed. She had slept in her dress. Her shoes sat beside the bed where she'd finally pulled them off sometime deep in the night. The blisters on her heels throbbed with each heartbeat. Voices drifted from the kitchen. The clatter of iron on iron. The smell of wood smoke curling under her. Clara splashed water from the basin on the dresser, straightened her hair in the clouded mirror, and opened the door. Martha stood at the stove, feeding kindling into the firebox. She didn't turn around. Coffee's in the pot. Cups are in the cabinet above the sink. Clara found a tin cup, poured the dark liquid, wrapped her fingers around the warmth. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, unsure where to put herself. Martha cracked eggs into a skillet. The sizzle filled the silence. You know how to work a stove like this? Yes. Good. Martha stepped aside, handed Clara the wooden spoon. Eggs stick if you don't keep them moving. Clara took over. The cast iron was heavy, the handle hot even through the cloth Martha had wrapped around it. She pushed the eggs across the surface, watching them firm up around the edges. Behind her, Martha moved without sound, placing plates on the table, slicing bread. The rhythm of a kitchen that had run this way for years. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Lily burst through the door first, braids half undone, barefoot on the cold floor. Miss Clara stayed. Rose appeared behind her sister, already dressed, hair neat. She said nothing, but her eyes tracked Clara's movements at the stove. Thomas came last, hat already on, boots laced tight. He nodded at Clara, took the plate Martha handed him, and sat. Girls, eat quick. I need to check the fence line on the south pasture. Can we come? Lily climbed into her chair. Not today. Stay with Miss Clara, and Clara spooned eggs onto plates. Set them in front of the twins. Lily attacked hers immediately. Rose picked up her fork but didn't eat. Just watched. The meal passed in the sounds of chewing and scraping. Thomas finished first, carried his plate to the sink, touched the top of each daughter's head. Behave. Then he was gone. The door closed behind him, and the kitchen felt smaller. Martha lowered herself into a chair with a soft grunt. Her hands, Clara noticed, were swollen at the knuckles, twisted slightly, like old tree root. Girls need lessons, Martha said. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Their mother used to teach them. You can take that over. Clara nodded. Garden needs weeding. Chickens need feeding. Laundry on Mondays. Martha ticked off the tasks without looking up. You'll figure out the rest. Lily pushed her empty plate away. Miss Clara, you want to see Biscuit? He's our pony. He's brown with a white spot on his nose like this. She pointed to the bridge of her own nose. After chores, Clara said. The words came out before she could think about them. Natural as breathing. Lily's face fell for half a second, then brightened again. Okay, can we do chores now? Rose slid off her chair, carried her plate to the sink, and set it down without a sound. She looked at Clara for a long moment. Mama used to stand there too, she said quietly, when she cooked. Then she walked out the back door toward the chicken coop. Clara's hand tightened on the spoon she was still holding. She set it down on the counter, beside the sink, exactly where her fingers had been resting. Martha watched from the table, but said nothing. The morning sun broke over the ridge, flooding the kitchen with pale gold light. Clara rolled up her sleeves, found the basin of wash water, and began scrubbing the skillet. The iron was still warm. The water steamed as it hit the surface. Behind her, she heard Lily run out after her sister. The screen door banging shut. Clara scrubbed harder. Her reflection in the window was just a shadow, featureless against the brightness outside. By midday, she had learned the shape of this place. Water came from the well by the back porch, 2 pumps of the handle for each bucket. The chicken coop held 8 hens and 1 bad-tempered rooster that tried to peck her ankles every time she entered. The garden stretched behind the barn tomatoes, beans, squash, all tangled with weeds that pulled free in long, stubborn. Lily followed her everywhere, chattering about the animals, about school, about the time Rose fell in the creek and came home covered in mud and got a whipping for ruining her good dress. Rose kept her distance. She helped with the chickens, pulled weeds beside Clara in the garden, but spoke only when spoken to. Her eyes never stopped watching. In the afternoon, Clara sat with both girls on the porch, McGuffey's reader open on her lap. Lily stumbled through the words, sounding out each syllable with her finger pressed to the page. Rose read silently ahead, fingers tracing the lines. You're good at this, Clara said to Rose. Rose didn't look up. Mama taught me. The words hung between them. Lily kept reading, oblivious. The sun dropped lower. Thomas returned as the shadows grew long, dust coating his clothes, sweat staining his hatband. He washed at the pump, sat on the porch steps, and listened to Lily recite what she'd learned. Clara stood in the doorway, watching. Martha appeared beside her. You did fine today. Clara said nothing. Doesn't mean anything yet, Martha continued, her voice pitched low so only Clara could hear. One day's easy. It's the staying that's hard. Inside, Clara set the table for dinner. 4 plates, 4 cups, 4 sets of silverware. She paused at her own place, hand resting on the back of the chair. The suitcase was still in her room. Still packed, still waiting. Her shoes sat beside the bed. Tonight, she told herself. Tonight she'd take them off properly, put them under the dresser. Maybe 3 weeks passed. Clara stopped counting the days. The suitcase still sat in the corner of her room, but she had unpacked her second dress and hung it on the hook behind the door. A small concession, a small surrender. Lily's fever. Clara noticed it at breakfast. The girl pushed her oatmeal around the bowl. Cheeks flushed pink, eyes glassy and distant. When Clara pressed the back of her hand to Lily's forehead, heat radiated through her skin like a coal stove. "She's burning up." Martha rose from her chair, joints cracking audibly. She felt Lily's face, her neck, pulled down her lower eyelid to check the color beneath. "Bed, now?" Thomas had already left for the fields. Clara carried Lily down the hall, the girl's thin arms wrapped around her neck, body limp and too warm against her chest. Lily weighed almost nothing, a bird wrapped in cotton. The twins' room was small, 2 narrow beds pushed against opposite walls, a rag rug between them, a window overlooking the back pasture. Clara laid Lily down, pulled off her shoes, tucked the quilt around her trembling body. Lily's eyes fluttered closed. "I'll get water and cloth," Martha said from the doorway. "You stay." Clara sat on the edge of the mattress. Lily's breath came in shallow puffs, her lips slightly parted, a thin sheen of sweat on her upper lip. Rose stood in the corner, pressed flat against the wall, watching her sister with wide eyes. Is she going to die? The question hit Clara like a fist to the chest. "No." The word came out sharp, too sharp. "No, she's not. It's just a fever." Rose didn't move. "Mama had a fever. Then she died." Clara's chest tightened. She looked at the small figure in the corner, 6 years old, already knowing too much about loss, already bracing for the next blow. "Your sister will be fine. I promise." The words felt fragile in her mouth. Promises were dangerous things. She knew that better than most. Martha returned with a basin of well water and muslin cloths. Clara dipped the fabric in, wrung it out, pressed it to Lily's forehead. The girl whimpered but didn't wake. Hours passed. Clara didn't leave the bedside. She changed the cloths when they grew warm, spooned water between Lily's cracked lips, watched the small chest rise and fall with each labored breath. Rose sat in the opposite bed, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins. Silent, watchful, waiting for something terrible to happen. The sun moved across the window. Afternoon light sliding into orange, then gray, then the deep blue of early evening. Thomas came home at dusk. His boots stopped in the doorway. Clara didn't turn around, but she felt him there, filling the frame with his presence. "How bad?" "The fever won't break." Clara's voice was hoarse from hours of silence. "It's been 10 hours now." Thomas crossed the room in 3 long strides, knelt beside the bed. His calloused hand covered his daughter's small one, rough fingers gentle as he brushed hair from her damp forehead. "Lily, Lily, sweetheart." The girl's eyelids flickered. "Papa," barely a whisper, a thread of sound. "I'm here." Clara stood, moved back to give him space. Her legs ached from sitting. Her back throbbed. She pressed her palms against the wall to steady herself. Martha appeared with broth, steam rising from the bowl. Thomas lifted Lily's head, helped her sip. Most of it dribbled down her chin, soaking into the pillow. But some went down. Night fell. Clara stayed. Rose finally slept around midnight, curled in her own bed, exhausted by fear. Thomas sat in a chair he'd dragged from the kitchen, positioned at the foot of Lily's bed. Head bowed, hands clasped between his knees. Clara kept the vigil. Cloth and water. Ring. Press. Cloth and water. Ring. Press. The rhythm became everything. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, she started humming. She didn't know where the melody came from, some half-remembered song from childhood, wordless and soft. Her throat was dry, the notes barely audible, but her hands never stopped moving. Lily's breathing steadied. Her cheeks, still pink, seemed less fiery beneath Clara's palm. Thomas looked up. Clara didn't stop humming. Her hand smoothed the damp hair back from Lily's face. Over and over. The motion automatic now. At dawn, Lily's fever broke. Clara felt it in the shift of temperature under her palm. The skin cool and clammy now. The flush fading to pale. Lily's eyes opened. Clear for the first time in 18 hours. Miss Clara. Clara's throat closed. She couldn't speak, just nodded. I'm thirsty. Clara poured water from the pitcher, held the cup to Lily's lips. The girl drank, then sank back against the pillow, already drifting into real sleep, healing sleep. Thomas stood. His hand landed on Clara's shoulder, brief and heavy, the weight of it pressed through her bones. Thank you. Then he was gone, back to the fields, because work didn't stop for anything. Not even this. Clara sat alone in the gray morning light. Her body felt hollow, wrung out like the cloths piled in the basin beside her. Rose stirred in the other bed, opened her eyes, looked first at her sister, then at Clara. You stayed? Rose said. Not a question. A statement. An observation filed away. Clara nodded. Rose climbed out of bed, crossed the narrow gap between them, and stood beside Clara's chair. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Rose leaned against Clara's arm, just rested there, her small weight warm and solid. Clara didn't move, didn't breathe. Something cracked inside her chest, something she had built carefully over years, mortared with silence and distance and the refusal to need anyone. The first fissure, she stared at the wall, at the thin light growing through the window, at her own hands resting useless in her lap. She had promised Rose that Lily would be fine. And Lily was fine, but promises were still dangerous things. Because now there was a second promise forming, unspoken, pressing against her ribs like a living thing. A promise she hadn't meant to make. The carriage arrived on a Thursday morning, wheels crunching on the dirt path like bones breaking. Clara was hanging laundry behind the house when she heard it. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked around to the front, and stopped dead. A woman stood on the porch, speaking with Martha. Gray silk dress with pearl buttons, bonnet trimmed with blue ribbon, gloves despite the mild autumn weather. Everything about her announced money, position, judgment. Martha's face was stone. I simply wanted to see for myself, the woman was saying. Her voice carried across the yard, pitched to be heard. Sarah was my dearest friend. I feel responsible for those poor motherless children. They're fine, Eleanor. Are they? The woman turned, in a nurse, and her eyes found Clara. They swept from her worn boots to her faded calico dress, to the loose strands of hair escaping her bun. And who is this? Clara's spine went rigid. She walked forward, stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Clara Whitfield. I help with the house and the girl? Eleanor Whitmore rolled the name around in her mouth like something sour. I don't believe I know any Whitfields in the territory. I'm not from here. Clearly. Eleanor descended one step, close enough that Clara could smell her perfume rosewater and something sharper beneath, like vinegar masked with flour. Where is your husband, Mrs. Whitfield? The question landed like a slap. Clara's mouth opened, closed. I'm a widow. Ah. Eleanor's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. How convenient. Martha stepped forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. Eleanor, the girls are resting. If you want to visit, come back another time. I'm not here for a social call. Eleanor's eyes never left Clara. I'm here because people in town are talking. A strange woman, living under Thomas Reed's roof. No family. No history anyone can verify. No references. She tilted her head, studying Clara like a bug pinned to a board. You understand how that looks, don't you? Clara's hands clenched at her sides. The laundry soap had cracked her knuckles, and the skin stung where she'd scraped it against the washboard. Her nails were broken. Her dress was patched at the elbow. I work here. Do you? Eleanor stepped closer still, close enough to whisper. And what exactly do you do to earn it? The implication hung in the air, foul and deliberate as a slap. Clara's face burned. Heat flooded her cheeks, her neck, the tips of her ears. Her throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand there while this woman stripped her bare with words. That's enough. Martha's voice cut through like an axe through kindling. You've said your piece. Now leave. Eleanor laughed, light and dismissive as a hand brushing away a fly. I'm only looking out for the children. Martha, surely you understand. Sarah was my dear friend. She would have wanted— Sarah would have thrown you off this porch herself? Martha's eyes blazed. Get back in your carriage. Eleanor gathered her skirts with exaggerated dignity, descended the steps, and brushed past Clara close enough to whisper. Whatever game you're playing, it won't last. I'll make sure of that. Then she was gone. The carriage rolled away, leaving dust hanging in the air like a curse. Clara stood frozen. Her legs wouldn't move. Her hands shook at her sides. Somewhere behind her, the laundry hung forgotten on the line, white sheets flapping in a wind that had turned cold. Martha watched from the porch but said nothing. Clara turned, walked past the house, past the laundry, past the chicken coop and the well in the barn. She walked until she reached the old oak at the edge of the pasture, the one Lily said their mother used to sit under with a book on summer afternoons. She sat down, pressed her back against the rough bark, drew her knees to her chest, and wept. Not quietly, not the dignified tears of a woman holding herself together. These were ugly sobs, pulled from somewhere deep in her gut, shaking her whole body until she couldn't breathe. Snot ran down her upper lip. Her eyes swelled. Her chest heaved until her ribs ached. She cried for the job she'd lost at the station, for the $3 that had been her only safety, for the husband who died 3 years ago and left her with nothing but debts and whispers, for every town she'd passed through since, every door that had closed, every face that had looked at her the way Eleanor Whitmore just had. She cried until there was nothing left, until she was hollow, scraped out, empty as a broken cup. The grass beneath her was damp from morning dew. At some point she had slid sideways, her cheek pressed against the earth, dirt smearing her face and mixing with tears. Her dress was ruined now, mud ground into the fabric, stains that would never come out. She didn't move to wipe it off. Footsteps rustled through the dry leaves. Clara didn't look up. Couldn't bear to see Martha or Thomas. Couldn't face their pity or their questions or whatever they might say. A small body settled beside her. Warmth pressed against her back. Miss Clara. Quiet. Uncertain. Clara's breath hitched. "You're crying," Rose said. Not accusing, just observing. The way children do. Recording facts. Clara couldn't answer. Her throat was raw, her voice somewhere far away. Rose didn't ask why. Didn't ask what happened. She just sat there, her small shoulder touching Clara's, her breathing slow and steady. Minutes passed. The sun dropped lower, casting long shadows through the oak branches. The leaves above them had turned gold and brown, and a few drifted down with each gust of wind. Finally, Rose spoke again. "Are you going to leave?" Clara's chest seized. She pushed herself up, wiped her face with the back of her muddy hand, looked at the girl beside her. Rose's eyes were wide, serious, holding something that looked terribly like fear. Clara opened her mouth to say no, to promise, to give Rose the answer she needed. But the words wouldn't come, because Eleanor Whitmore's voice was still in her head. Because the stairs of this town were already forming in her imagination. Whispers at church. Turned backs at the general store. Judgment following her wherever she went. Because she had learned, over and over, that staying only meant more chances to be torn apart. Rose waited. Clara looked at her hands. Dirt under the nails. Cracked knuckles. Mud drying on her palms. The hands of someone who worked, who tried, who kept going even when everything fell apart. "I don't know," she whispered. Rose's face didn't crumble. It just went still. A 6-year-old learning, once again, that the people she loved might leave. She stood up, brushed off her dress, looked down at Clara with eyes too old for her face. "Okay." Then she walked back toward the house, small figure growing smaller against the fading light. Clara sat under the oak until the stars came out, until her body was stiff and cold and numb, until she couldn't feel anything at all. When she finally returned to the house, her suitcase was still in her room. She pulled it out, set it on the bed, opened the latches. Her hands hovered over the empty interior. "Pack," she told herself. "Leave before it gets worse. Leave before you start to believe this could last." But her fingers wouldn't move. She beat for part 7. The suitcase stayed open on the bed all night. Clara didn't sleep. She sat in the chair by the window, watching the darkness give way to gray, then to pale gold streaking across the horizon. Her dress from yesterday was still on, wrinkled and stained with mud and dried tears. She hadn't washed her face, hadn't brushed her hair, hadn't done anything but sit there, hands folded in her lap, watching the hours pass. At 5:30, she heard Martha moving in the kitchen, the familiar clang of the stove door, the pump of water into the basin. Clara didn't move. Footsteps in the hallway. A knock on her door. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, Martha's voice, flat and neutral, giving nothing away. Clara stared at the suitcase. One dress still hung on the hook behind the door. Her hairbrush sat on the dresser. The quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Leave now. Before the girls wake up. Before Thomas comes back from the barn. Before anyone can see the look on her face and know what Eleanor Whitmore's words had done to her, she stood, walked to the suitcase, picked up the dress from the hook, her hands folded it, placed it inside, reached for the hairbrush outside the window. A figure crossed the yard. Small, braids bouncing with each step. Lily. Running toward the chicken coop with the feed bucket swinging from her arm. Clara's hands stopped. She watched Lily struggle with the coop door, prop it open with her hip, disappear inside. A moment later, the girl emerged, grinning wide, a brown hen tucked under her arm, like a baby. Miss Clara, look, Penny, let me pick her up." The shout carried through the thin glass. Lily waved with her free hand, the hen squawking in protest. Clara's throat tightened. She set the hairbrush down, closed the suitcase, pushed it back under the bed. Not yet, she told herself. Not like this. Not without saying goodbye. She washed her face in the basin, the cold water sharp against her swollen eyes, changed into her clean dress, twisted her hair into a knot at the back of her neck. Walked out to the kitchen. Martha stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal. She glanced at Clara, eyes moving quickly to her face. Her hands, the set of her shoulder. "You staying?" Clara picked up the coffee pot, poured a cup. Her hand was steady. "For now?" Martha nodded. The day passed. Clara moved through it like she was watching herself from outside her own body, feeding the chickens, weeding the garden, helping Lily with her letters while Rose sat apart and pretended not to listen. She spoke when spoken to, smiled when the girls expected it, did everything right. But the suitcase was still under the bed, still packed. At dinner, Thomas ate in silence. His eyes moved to Clara once, twice, but he didn't speak. Martha had told him something. Clara could see it in the careful way he didn't ask questions. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The boards were rough-hewn, dark with age, marked by knotholes that looked like eyes in the dim light. She could leave tomorrow, or the day after. There was nothing keeping her here, except her own weakness, her own pathetic need to belong somewhere, to someone. Eleanor Whitmore's voice echoed in her head. "Whatever game you're playing, it won't last." Clara closed her eyes. She dreamed of the train station, the letter in her pocket, the moment everything fell apart. In the dream, she was still sitting on that bench, and every train that came through passed without stopping. She sat there for years, decades, until she was old and gray and forgotten. When she woke, it was still dark, the house silent around her. She dressed in the darkness, pulled the suitcase from under the bed, carried it to the front door, careful to avoid the boards that creaked. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. Her hand rested on the door handle. Cold iron under her palm. One turn. Once she pulled. The door swung open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp earth and dying leaves and the first hint of frost on the wind. Clara stepped onto the porch. The rocking chair sat empty. The moon hung low over the pasture, full and white and watching. She walked down the steps. Her boots crunched on the dirt path. At the gate, she stopped. The road stretched north toward town. 3 miles to the station. She could catch the morning train, go somewhere else, start over. Again. Always again. Her fingers curled around the suitcase handle. Behind her, a floorboard creak turned. Rose stood in the doorway, barefoot, nightgown white in the moonlight, eyes fixed on the suitcase in Clara's hand. Neither of them spoke. Rose's chin trembled. Just once. Then it steadied. "You said you didn't know," the girl whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I thought maybe—" She stopped. Swallowed hard, Clara stood frozen at the gate. The suitcase hung from her fingers. The road waited behind her. The house waited in front. And between them, a child who had already lost too much. Rose took one step forward, then stopped, as if afraid to come closer, as if coming closer might make Clara disappear faster. "Mama left too," Rose said. Her voice was flat now, empty, the way children sound when they've learned not to hope. "She didn't want to, but she left." Clara's chest cracked open. She saw herself as Rose saw her, another woman in this doorway. Another figure walking away. Another promise that couldn't be kept. Another hole in a heart that was already more wound than flesh. The suitcase suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Clara looked at the road. Looked at Rose. The girl's face was pale in the moonlight. Waiting. Already bracing for the answer she expected. Already building the wall she would need to survive it. And something shifted inside Clara. Something stubborn and raw and angry, not at Rose, not at this house, but at herself. At every time she had run, every door she had closed, every person she had left before they could leave her first. She was so tired of running, her fingers unclenched. The suitcase dropped to the dirt. She walked back, past the gate, up the path, onto the porch. Rose didn't. Clara knelt in front of her, eye to eye, close enough to see the tear tracks on the girl's cheeks, the ones she'd been trying so hard to hide. "I'm not leaving." Rose's lips pressed together. "You had your suitcase." "I know." Clara's voice cracked. "I was scared. I'm still scared. But I'm not leaving." Rose stared at her, searching for the lie, waiting for the catch. Clara didn't look away. Something in Rose's face shifted. The wall cracked, just a fraction. "Promise?" Clara's throat closed. Promises were dangerous. She knew that. Had learned it over and over. Written in scar tissue across her heart, but she was so tired of protecting herself from things that might hurt. "I promise." Rose's arms came up, wrapped around Clara's neck, small body shaking. Tears soaking into Clara's shoulder. Clara held her. Tight. Let her own tears fall into Rose's hair. Behind them, the suitcase sat in the dirt where she'd dropped it. Tomorrow, she would carry it back inside. Unpack it for real this time. Hang her dress on the hook. Put her brush on the dresser. Fold the quilt at the foot of the bed. But tonight, she just held Rose and let herself stay. Spring came slowly to Copper Spring. Clara noticed it first in the mornings, the light arriving earlier each day, the air losing its bite, the frost retreating from the window panes by the time she woke. Then the crocuses pushed through the hard ground beside the porch, purple and white, against the brown earth, stubborn and bright. 6 months since the train station. 6 months since the suitcase. She stood on the porch now, watching the girls run through the garden. Lily chased a butterfly, arms pinwheeling, laughter floating across the yard like something you could almost catch. Rose walked behind her sister, hands clasped, but there was something lighter in her step. Something that hadn't been there in October. Martha appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of tea in her swollen hands. Sit. Clara took the cup, lowered herself into the rocking chair. Martha settled into the other one, groaning softly as her joints protested the movement. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the girls. "You're stubborn," Martha said finally. "Like Sarah was." Clara's fingers tightened. It took her a whole year to stop fighting this place. Martha sipped her tea, eyes still on the garden. "Kept your bags packed for months." Thomas pretended not to notice. Clara had never heard Martha speak this much about Sarah. The admission hung in the air, unexpected and tender. "She stayed, though, quietly." "She did." Martha's eyes followed Lily as she tumbled through the vegetable beds, chasing something invisible. "And then she left in a way none of us could stop." Clara said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. "The girls need someone who stays," Martha continued after a moment. "Not because they have to, because they choose to." The words landed softly, like seeds dropping into tilled soil. Thomas came around the corner of the barn, leading the old mare toward the water trough. He moved the way he always moved, steady, unhurried, economical. A man who had learned not to waste anything, including himself. He looked up, saw Clara on the porch, touched the brim of his hat. 6 months. And that was still the extent of its small gestures, practical conversations, the careful distance of 2 people sharing a space, but not yet a life. Maybe that would change. Maybe it wouldn't. Clara found she was no longer in a hurry to know. She raised her cup in acknowledgement. Lily spotted her father and changed course, abandoning the butterfly mid-chase. Papa, can we plant flowers today?" Miss Clara said the ground is soft enough." Thomas caught her as she launched herself at his legs, lifted her up, set her on his hip like she weighed nothing. Did she now? "The purple ones like Mama used to have, and the yellow ones, and the white ones. And we'll see." Rose reached them, stood beside her father. She didn't grab or shout, just waited, quiet and certain. Thomas put his free hand on her head. "You want flowers too?" Rose nodded. "By the oak tree, where Mama used to read." Clara's chest tightened. She set down her tea, pushed herself up from the chair, walked down the porch step. "I can help," she said. "I saw seeds at the general store last week. They should still have some left." Thomas looked at her. Really looked. The way he rarely did, taking her in, weighing something she couldn't name. "All right." They drove to town that afternoon. All 4 of them crowded onto the wagon bench. Lily sat on Clara's lap, chattering about which colors to choose and where to plant them and how tall they would grow. Rose sat between Clara and Thomas, quiet but present, her shoulder warm against Clara's arm. The general store smelled of leather and dried beans and penny candy. The owner, a heavy-set man named Patterson, looked up as they entered. "Mr. Reed?" He nodded. His eyes moved to Clara. "Ma'am." Clara felt the weight of his gaze. The questions he didn't ask. She held her chin level, refused to look away. "Flower seeds," Thomas said. "Whatever you've got." They left with packets of cosmos and marigolds and larkspur. Lily carried them like treasure, pressed against her chest, showing them to anyone who would look. On the ride home, Rose leaned against Clara's arm, didn't say anything, just leaned. Clara let her. That evening, they planted. Clara dug holes with the small trowel while Lily dropped seeds in. Too many in each hole, But Clara didn't correct her. Rose covered them with soil, patting the earth smooth with her small hands. Thomas watched from the porch. Martha sat beside him, her tea long gone cold in her hands. When the last seed was planted, Lily stood back and surveyed their work with the gravity of a general reviewing troops. How long until they grow? A few weeks, Clara said. Maybe longer. That's forever. It'll go fast. You'll see. Rose brushed dirt from her palms and looked up at Clara, something flickering behind her eyes. Miss Clara? Yes? Are you going to be here when they bloom? Clara looked at the girl, at her serious eyes, her careful hope, the way she still braced herself for disappointment even as she reached for something more. I'm going to be here. Rose held her gaze for a long moment, then she nodded, once, and walked toward the house. Lily grabbed Clara's hand, tugging hard. Come on, Gran said she made pie. Clara let herself be pulled through the garden, up the porch steps, past Thomas, who stood and held the door open for them. Thank you, Clara said as she passed. For what? She paused, looked back at the garden, the freshly turned soil, the place where flowers would soon grow. For not giving up on me. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, just slightly. Clara walked inside. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and warm butter and the particular sweetness of apples baked soft. Martha was cutting slices, the girls already at the table, forks ready. 4 plates, 4 forks. 4 people who had found their way to each other through loss and stubbornness, and something that might eventually become more. Clara sat down, picked up her fork. Outside. The sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the deep purple of coming night. The suitcase was still under her bed, but she hadn't opened it in months. Hadn't needed to. This was home now. Not because someone had given it to her, because she had chosen it, and that made all the difference. There is something quiet about finding your place in the world. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or certainty. It comes slowly, like spring after a long frost, tentative at first, then steady, then undeniable. Many of us know what it means to stand at a crossroads with nothing but what we carry. Some of us have been the stranger in a strange town, wondering if anyone would ever see us for who we really are. Perhaps you have felt the weight of a suitcase that stays packed, just in case. Perhaps you have known the fear of staying, and the loneliness of leaving, and the impossible space between them. It's all right to be uncertain. It's okay if belonging takes time, if trust builds slowly, if the walls we've built come down brick by brick instead of all at once. We are allowed to rest in the middle of our own because. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for staying until the end.